107 The castellan was subject to a certain sickness, which came upon him every year, and deprived him of his wits. The sign of its approach was that he kept continually talking, or rather jabbering, to no purpose. These humors took a different shape each year. One time he thought he was an oil jar, another time he thought he was a frog, and hopped about as frogs do, another time he thought he was dead, and then they had to bury him. Not a year passed, but he got some such hypochondriac notions into his head. At this season he imagined that he was a bat, and when he went abroad to take the air, he used to scream like bats in a high thin tone, and then he would flap his hands and body, as though he were about to fly. The doctors, when they saw the fit coming on him, and his old servants, gave him all the distractions they could think of, and since they had noticed that he derived much pleasure from my conversation, they were always fetching me to keep him company. At times the poor man detained me for 4 or 5 stricken hours without ever letting me cease talking. He used to keep me at his table, eating opposite to him, and never stopped chatting, and making me chat, but during those discourses I contrived to make a good meal. He, poor man, could neither eat nor sleep, so that at last he wore me out. I was at the end of my strength, and sometimes when I looked at him, I noticed that his eyeballs were rolling in a frightful manner, one looking one way and the other in another. He took it into his head to ask me whether I had ever had a fancy to fly. I answered that it had always been my ambition to do those things which offer the greatest difficulties to men, and that I had done them. As to flying, the God of nature had gifted me with a body well suited for running and leaping far beyond the common average, and that with the talents I possess for manual art, I felt sure I had the courage to try flying. He then inquired what methods I should use, to which I answered that, taking into consideration all flying creatures, and wishing to imitate by art what they derived from nature, none was so apt to model as the bat. No sooner had the poor man heard the name bat, which recalled the humor he was suffering under, than he cried out at the top of his voice, he says true, the bat's the thing, the bat's the thing. Then he turned to me and said, Benvenuto, if one gave you the opportunity, should you have the heart to fly? I said if you would set me at liberty. I fell quite up to flying down to Prati, after making myself a pair of wings out of wax linen. Thereupon he replied, I too should be prepared to take flight, but since the Pope has bidden me guard you, as though you were his own eyes, and I know you a clever devil who would certainly escape, I shall now have you locked up with 100 keys in order to prevent you slipping through my fingers. I then began to implore him, and remind him that I might have fled, but that on account of the word which I had given him, I would never have betrayed his trust. Therefore I begged him for the love of God, and by the kindness he had always shown me, not to add greater evils to the misery of my present situation. While I was pouring out these entreaties, he gave strict orders to have me bound, and taken and locked up in prison. On seeing that it could not be helped, I told him before all his servants, lock me well up, and keep good watch on me, for I shall certainly contrive to escape. So they took and confined me with the utmost care. 108 I then began to deliberate upon the best way of making my escape. No sooner had I been locked in, than I went about exploring my prison, and when I thought I had discovered how to get out of it, I pondered the means of descending from the lofty keep, for so the great round central tower is called. I took those new sheets of mine, which, as I have said already, I had cut in strips and sewn together. Then I reckoned up the quantity which would be sufficient for my purpose. Having made this estimate, and put all things in order, I took out a pair of pincers which I had abstracted from a savoyard belonging to the guard of the castle. This man superintended the casks and cisterns. He also amused himself with carpentering. Now he possessed several pairs of pincers, among which was one both big and heavy. I then, thinking it would suit my purpose, took it and hid it in my straw mattress. The time had now come for me to use it, so I began to try the nails which kept the hinges of my door in place. The door was double, and the clinching of the nails could not be seen, so that when I attempted to draw one out, I met with the greatest trouble. In the end, however, I succeeded. When I had drawn the first nail, I bethought me how to prevent its being noticed. For this purpose I mixed some rust, which I had scraped from old iron, with a little wax, obtaining exactly the same color as the heads of the long nails which I had extracted. Then I set myself to counterfeit these heads and placed them on the holfus. For each nail I extracted I made a counterfeit in wax. I left the hinges attached to their doorposts at top and bottom by means of some of the same nails that I had drawn, but I took care to cut these, and replace them lightly, so that they only just supported the irons of the hinges. All this I performed with the greatest difficulty, because the castellan kept dreaming every night that I had escaped, which made him send from time to time to inspect my prison. The man who came had the title and behavior of a catchpole. He was called Bozza, and used always to bring with him another of the same sort, named Giovanni and nicknamed Pedignan. The latter was a soldier, and Bozza a serving man. Giovanni never entered my prison without saying something offensive to me. He came from the district of Prato, and had been an apothecary in the town there. Every evening he minutely examined the holfus of the hinges and the whole chamber, and I used to say, keep a good watch over me, for I am resolved by all means to escape. These words bred a great enmity between him and me, so that I was obliged to use precautions to conceal my tools, that is to say, my pincers and a great big poniard and other appurtenances. All these I put away together in my mattress, where I also kept the strips of linen I had made. When day broke, I used immediately to sweep my room out, and though I am by nature a lover of cleanliness, at that time I kept myself unusually spick and span. After sweeping up, I made my bed as daintily as I could, laying flowers upon it, which a Savoyard used to bring me nearly every morning. He had the care of the cistern and the casks, and also amused himself with carpentering. It was from whom I stole the pincers which I used in order to draw out the nails from the hulfists of the hinges. 109 Well, to return to the subject of my bed, when Baza and Pedignan came, I always told them to give it a white berth, so as not to dirty and spoil it for me. Now and then, just to irritate me, they would touch it lightly, upon which I cried, "Ah, dirty cowards! I'll lay my hand on one of your swords there, and will do you a mischief that will make you wonder. Do you think you are fit to touch the bed of a man like me? When I chastise you I shall not heed my own life, for I am certain to take yours. Let me alone then with my troubles and my tribulations, and don't give me more annoyance than I have already. If not, I shall make you see what a desperate man is able to do." These words they reported to the castellan, who gave them express orders never to go near my bed, and when they came to me, to come without swords, but for the rest, to keep a watchful guard upon me. Having thus secured my bed from meddlers, I felt as though the main point was gained, for there lay all things needful to my adventure. It happened on the evening of a certain feast day that the castellan was seriously indisposed. His humors grew extravagant, he kept repeating that he was a bat, and if they heard that Benvenuto had flown away, they must let him go to catch me up. Since he could fly by night most certainly as well or better than myself, for it was thus he argued. Benvenuto is a counterfeit bat, but I am a real one, and since he is committed to my care, leave me to act, I shall be sure to catch him. He had passed several nights in this frenzy, and had worn out all his servants, whereof I received full information through divers channels, but especially from the Savoyard, who was my friend at heart. On the evening of that feast day, then, I made my mind up to escape, come what might, and first I prayed most devoutly to God, imploring His Divine Majesty to protect and succor me in that so perilous adventure. Afterwards I set to work at all the things I needed, and labored the whole of the night. It was 2 hours before daybreak when at last I removed those hinges with the greatest toil, but the wooden panel itself and the bolt too offered such resistance that I could not open the door. So I had to cut into the wood, yet in the end I got it open, and shouldering the strips of linen which I had rolled up like bundles of flax upon 2 sticks, I went forth and directed my steps towards the latrines of the keep. Spying from within 2 tiles upon the roof, I was able at once to clamber up with ease. I wore a white doublet with a pair of white hose, and a pair of half boots, into which I had stuck the poniard I have mentioned. After scaling the roof, I took one end of my linen roll, and attached it to a piece of antique tile which was built into the fortress wall. It happened to jut out scarcely 4 fingers. In order to fix the band, I gave it the form of a stirrup. When I had attached it to that piece of tile, I turned to God and said, "Lord God, give aid to my good cause. You know that it is good. You see that I am aiding myself." Then I let myself go gently by degrees, supporting myself with the sinews of my arms, until I touched the ground. There was no moonshine, but the light of a fair open heaven. When I stood upon my feet on solid earth, I looked up at the vast height which I had descended with such spirit, and went gladly away, thinking I was free. But this was not the case, for the castellan on that side of the fortress had built 2 lofty walls, the space between which he used for stable and henyard. The place was barred with thick iron bolts outside. I was terribly disgusted to find there was no exit from this trap, but while I paced up and down debating what to do, I stumbled on a long pole which was covered up with straw. Not without great trouble I succeeded in placing it against the wall, and then swarmed up it by the force of my arms until I reached the top. But since the wall ended in a sharp ridge, I had not strength enough to drag the pole up after me. Accordingly I made my mind up to use a portion of the second roll of linen which I had there. The other was left hanging from the keep of the castle. So I cut a piece off, tied it to the pole, and clambered down the wall, enduring the utmost toil and fatigue. I was quite exhausted, and had, moreover, flayed the inside of my hands, which bled freely. This compelled me to rest a while, and I bathed my hands in my own urine. When I thought that my strength was recovered, I advanced quickly toward the last rampart, which faces toward Prati. There I put my bundle of linen lines down upon the ground, meaning to fasten them round a battlement, and descend the lesser as I had the greater height. But no sooner had I placed the linen, than I became aware behind me of a sentinel, who was going the rounds. Seeing my designs interrupted and my life in peril, I resolved to face the guard. This fellow, when he noticed my bold front, and that I was marching on him with weapon in hand, quickened his pace and gave me a wide berth. I had left my lines some little way behind, so I turned with hasty steps to regain them, and though I came within sight of another sentinel, he seemed as though he did not choose to take notice of me. Having found my lines, and attached them to the battlement, I let myself go. On the descent, whether it was that I thought I had really come to earth and relaxed my grasp to jump, or whether my hands were so tired that they could not keep their hold, at any rate I fell, struck my head in falling, and lay stunned for more than an hour and a half, so far as I could judge. It was just upon daybreak, when the fresh breeze which blows an hour before the sun revived me. Yet I did not immediately recover my senses, for I thought my head had been cut off and fancied that I was in purgatory. With time, little by little, my faculties returned, and I perceived that I was outside the castle, and in a flash remembered all my adventures. I was aware of the wound in my head before I knew my leg was broken, for I put my hands up, and withdrew them covered with blood. Then I searched the spot well, and judged and ascertained that I had sustained no injury of consequence there. But when I wanted to stand up, I discovered that my right leg was broken 3 inches above the heel. Not even this dismayed me. I drew forth my poniard with its scabbard. The latter had a metal point ending in a large ball, which had caused the fracture of my leg, for the bone, coming into violent contact with the ball, and not being able to bend, had snapped at that point. I threw the sheath away, and with the poniard cut a piece of the linen which I had left. Then I bound my leg up as well as I could, and crawled on all fours with the poniard in my hand toward the city gate. When I reached it, I found it shut, but I noticed a stone just beneath the door, which did not appear to be very firmly fixed. This I attempted to dislodge. After setting my hands to it, and feeling it move, it easily gave way, and I drew it out. Through the gap thus made I crept into the town. 110 I had crawled more than 500 paces from the place where I fell, to the gate by which I entered. No sooner had I got inside than some mastiff dogs set upon me and bit me badly. When they returned to the attack and worried me, I drew my poniard and wounded one of them so sharply that he howled aloud, and all the dogs, according to their nature, ran after him. I meanwhile made the best way I could on all fours toward the church of the Trespentina. On arriving at the opening of the street which leads to Sant'Agnolo, I turned off in the direction of San Piero, and now the dawn had risen over me, and I felt myself in danger. When therefore I chanced to meet a water carrier driving his donkey laden with full buckets, I called the fellow, and begged him to carry me upon his back to the terrace by the steps of San Piero, adding, I am an unfortunate young man, who, while escaping from a window in a love adventure, have fallen and broken my leg. The place from which I made my exit is one of great importance, and if I am discovered, I run risk of being cut to pieces, so for heaven's sake let me quickly, and I will give you a crown of gold. Saying this, I clapped my hand to my purse, where I had a good quantity. He took me up at once, hitched me on his back, and carried me to the raised terrace by the steps to San Piero. There I bade him leave me, saying he must run back to his donkey. I resumed my march, crawling always on all fours, and making for the palace of the Duchess, wife of Duke Ottavio and daughter of the Emperor. She was his natural child, and had been married to Duke Alessandro. I chose her house for refuge, because I was quite certain that many of my friends, who had come with that great princess from Florence, were tarrying there, also because she had taken me into favor through something which the Castellan had said in my behalf. Wishing to be of service to me, he told the Pope that I had saved the city more than 1,000 crowns of damage, caused by heavy rain on the occasion, when the Duchess made her entrance into Rome. He related how he was in despair, and how I put heart into him, and went on to describe how I had pointed several large pieces of artillery in the direction where the clouds were thickest, and whence a deluge of water was already pouring. Then, when I began to fire, the rain stopped, and at the 4th discharge the sun shone out, and so I was the sole cause of the festival succeeding, to the joy of everybody. On hearing this narration the Duchess said, that Benvenuto is one of the artists of merit, who enjoyed the goodwill of my late husband, Duke Alessandro, and I shall always hold them in mind if an opportunity comes of doing such men's service. She also talked of me to Duke Ottavio. For these reasons I meant to go straight to the house of Her Excellency, which was a very fine palace situated in Borgio Vecchio. I should have been quite safe from recapture by the Pope, if I could have stayed there, but my exploits up to this point had been too marvelous for a human being, and God was unwilling to encourage my vainglory. Accordingly, for my own good, he chastised me a second time worse even than the first. The cause of this was that, while I was crawling on all fours up those steps, a servant of Cardinal Cornaro recognized me. His master was then lodging in the palace, so the servant ran up to his room and woke him, crying, Most Reverend Monsignor, your friend Benvenuto is down there. He has escaped from the castle, and is crawling on all fours, streaming with blood. To all appearances he has broken a leg, and we don't know whither he is going. The cardinal exclaimed at once, Run and carry him upon your back into my room here. When I arrived, he told me to be under no apprehension, and sent for the first physicians of Rome to take my case in hand. Among them was Maestro Giacomo of Perugia, a most excellent and able surgeon. He set the bone with dexterity, then bound the limb up, and bled me with his own hand. It happened that my veins were swollen far beyond their usual size, and he too wished to make a pretty white incision. Accordingly the blood sprang forth so copiously, and spurted with such force into his face, that he had to abandon the operation. He regarded this as a very bad omen, and could hardly be prevailed upon to undertake my cure. Indeed, he often expressed a wish to leave me, remembering that he ran no little risk of punishment for having treated my case, or rather for having proceeded to the end with it. The cardinal had me placed in a secret chamber, and went off immediately, to beg me from the Pope. 111 During this, while all Rome was in an uproar, for they had observed the bands of linen fastened to the great keep of the castle, and folk were running in crowds, to behold so extraordinary a thing. The castellan had gone off into one of his worst fits of frenzy. In spite of all his servants, he insisted upon taking his flight also from the tower, saying that no one could recapture me except himself, if he were to fly after me. Messer Roberto Pucci, the father of Messer Pandolfo, having heard of the great event, went in person to inspect the place. Afterwards he came to the palace, where he met with Cardinal Cornaro, who told him exactly what had happened, and how I was lodged in one of his own chambers, and already in the doctor's hands. These two worthy men went together, and threw themselves upon their knees before the Pope, but he, before they could get a word out, cried aloud, "I know all that you want of me." Messer Roberto Pucci then began, "Most blessed Father, we beg you for heaven's grace to give us up that unfortunate man. Surely his great talents entitle him to exceptional treatment. Moreover, he has displayed such audacity, blended with so much ingenuity, that his exploit might seem superhuman. We know not for what crimes your holiness has kept him so long in prison. However, if those crimes are too exorbitant, your holiness is wise and holy, and may your will be done unquestioned. Still, if they are such as can be condoned, we entreat you to pardon him for our sake." The Pope, when he heard this, felt shame, and answered, "I have kept him in prison at the request of some of my people, since he is a little too violent in his behavior, but recognizing his talents, and wishing to keep him near our person, we had intended to treat him so well, that he should have no reason to return to France. I am very sorry to hear of his bad accident. Tell him to mind his health, and when he is recovered, we will make it up to him for all his troubles." Those two excellent men returned and told me the good news they were bringing from the Pope. Meanwhile the nobility of Rome, young, old, and all sorts, came to visit me. The castellan, out of his mind as he was, had himself carried to the Pope, and when he was in the presence of his holiness, began to cry out, and to say that if he did not send me back to prison, he would do him a great wrong. He escaped under parole which he gave me. Woe is me that he has flown away when he promised not to fly. The Pope said, laughing, "Go, go, for I will give him back to you without fail." The castellan then added, speaking to the Pope, "Send the governor to him to find out who helped him to escape, for if it is one of my men, I will hang him from the battlement whence Benvenuto leaped." On his departure the Pope called the governor, and said, smiling, "That is a brave fellow, and his exploit is something marvelous. All the same, when I was a young man, I also descended from the fortress at that very spot." And so saying the Pope spoke the truth, for he had been imprisoned in the castle for forging a brief at the time, when he was abbreviator di Parco Majoris. Pope Alexander kept him confined for some length of time, and afterwards, his offense being of too ugly a nature, had resolved on cutting off his head. He postponed the execution, however, till after Corpus Domini, and Farnese, getting wind of the Pope's will, summoned Pietro Chiaveluzzi with a lot of horses, and managed to corrupt some of the castle guards with money. Accordingly, upon the day of Corpus Domini, while the Pope was going in procession, Farnese got into a basket and was let down by a rope to the ground. At that time the outer walls had not been built around the castle, only the great central tower existed, so that he had not the same enormous difficulty that I met with in escaping. Moreover, he had been imprisoned justly, and I against all equity. What he wanted was to brag before the governor of having in his youth been spirited and brave, and it did not occur to him that he was calling attention to his own huge rogueries. He said then, "Go and tell him to reveal his accomplice without apprehension to you, be the man who he may be, since I have pardoned him, and this you may assure him without reservation."